Have you ever written a song you never finished, simply because it carried a pain you weren't ready to face? And what if, 30 years later, that very melody suddenly played again from an old music box held by a woman you've never met, who turns out to be the mother of the boy who once cherished that tune? This isn't just a story about music. It's about a hidden photograph, a promise that was never spoken aloud, and a man who thought he'd forgotten how to love. If you believe that some melodies find their way back home, leave a comment below and subscribe now, because this story might just make you believe in the things that once fell silent. Some things seem like they have gone silent forever, until a tiny click echoes through the air, and an entire past, long buried, begins to rise. The music box arrived on a quiet, rainy afternoon. No one was expecting it. No one believed it could still play a single note. But somehow, that small, lifeless object reached into the hearts of two people who had long forgotten how to feel, pulling them back to an old sorrow and quietly starting something new. Lucas Griffin lived in a fog-kissed town called Pine Grove Ridge, where every porch was used to cold winds and unfinished stories. He was a mechanic now, but once he had been a musician, a man who believed music could hold on to the most precious thing in his life. That belief shattered the day his brother Tristan passed away. Lucas locked his guitar away, folded up his final song, and buried it with time. He never thought he'd write the ending, until the day Grace Harper walked into his garage. She didn't come with the air of a powerful businesswoman, just tired eyes, a pale gray coat, and a weathered music box, the only thing left after the accident that took her only son. "This box used to play a tune he loved," she said. "I want to hear it again." Lucas had never been afraid to fix anything, except himself. But when he gently turned the worn gear, and that faint melody began to whisper through the room, memories surged through him like a flood. The song he once wrote, once played, then quietly forgot, now drifting out from the hands of a stranger. And what stole the air from his lungs was the look in Grace's eyes. Eyes that had clearly heard that melody before, long ago, deep within, not just with ears, but with the heart of a mother who once stood silent in the middle of a distant summer night. And just like that, the music box didn't just open a song, it opened life again. It opened grief. It opened a second chance for two souls who had once believed they had nothing left to believe in. At the far end of the rutted dirt road that wound through Pine Grove Ridge, past the abandoned gas station in the old cedar woods, stood a small garage with a sagging tin roof and a hand-painted sign, its faded letters barely legible. Griffin's Garage. That's where Lucas worked every single day, alone. No radio, no guard dog, just the clatter of metal and the steady breath of a man who had spent years trying to forget he ever existed. He never accepted extra change, always brewed his own coffee before the first light of dawn, and he always wiped his hands clean before touching any instrument, be it a tuning wrench or a tire mallet. People in town whispered. Some said he used to be in the military. Others thought he once worked for a big-name auto company and walked away. But no one ever mentioned the old piano covered in a dusty cloth in the corner of the garage. And Lucas, he never touched it, not because he forgot how to play, but because he remembered exactly why he ever played at all. Tristan, his older brother, his entire world, was gone far too soon. A genetic illness. Sudden. Cruel. That summer, Lucas sat at the piano for 3 nights without sleep, composing a nameless piece. Not for a stage, not for anyone, just to hold on to a piece of his brother. But after the funeral, he folded up the sheet music, locked the piano, and never opened it again. The only person who had ever heard that song was a girl he met one summer night in the park. She stood beneath the golden string lights hanging low in the trees, listening in silence, as if every note was the only thing that mattered in the entire world. The next day she vanished, and in a way so did Lucas, vanished from himself. All that remained was the garage, the oil, the silence, and a man who lived like sound had long since died inside him. Until a knock echoed at the door, and a music box appeared, awakening not just an old melody, but the man he used to be. That afternoon there was no rain, and yet Pine Grove Ridge felt soaked in a kind of lingering melancholy, a dull gray light that made it all too easy to remember what you'd once lost. A charcoal SUV pulled up in front of Griffin's garage. The engine cut off softly, like the sigh of someone who'd lived too long with silence. Grace Harper stepped out. No one in town knew who she was. No one noticed the expensive heels pressing into the muddy, worn-out ground. But Lucas looked up, not because of the polished appearance, but because of the way she clutched a cloth-wrapped wooden box, as if it held her entire world. "Are you Lucas Griffin?" she asked, her voice soft, but steady. He gave a small nod. She stepped forward and gently placed the carefully wrapped object on the grease-stained workbench. "I was told you're good at fixing old things." It wasn't a car, it wasn't a watch, it was a music box. "It belonged to my son," Grace said, her eyes landing squarely on the place where pain liked to hide. "Ryan, he passed 3 years ago. He loved this box, used to hum along with its tune before bed." Lucas opened the lid. The gears were worn down. The metal comb was bent. No sound. But something inside him tensed. A cold wind slipping through a wound never truly closed. He flipped the box over and checked the bottom. Faint lettering, nearly lost beneath the dust of time. "For the nights. We will always remember." Lucas froze. His heart skipped a beat. That wasn't machine-stamped. It was handwritten. And in that moment, the shape of an old melody crashed into him. A song he once composed, played only once, for a brother now gone. A song never recorded, never shared. So how was that melody here? Lucas gently adjusted the gear inside the music box, sliding a thin piece of paper beneath it for stability. His hands were steady, just like every other repair he'd done before. But when the metal comb brushed against the cylinder and those first faint stumbling notes rang out, Lucas froze. Not because the melody was off, but because he knew it. Not new in the way you recognize a tune. He knew it like muscle memory, like breath, like each pause that lingered too long, each suspended silence that once mirrored his own, in a summer that would never return. This song was his, a half-finished piano piece he'd written when he was 17. No title, no sheet music, played only once, at a charity concert in Summerlight Commons Park, beneath a canopy of golden string lights and soft plastic cups of lemonade. Lucas looked up at Grace. Her eyes were closed, lips pressed gently together, and a single tear slid down her cheek. Not out of grief, but because she was hearing something she didn't even know she remembered. "Ryan used to hum this," she whispered. "He never knew the name, but he always sang along, as if he knew it from somewhere inside." The words struck Lucas like a punch he never saw coming. "The boy," he began, but the rest caught in his throat. He reached beneath the box, unlocking a hidden compartment, an old craftsman's trick, visible only to those who knew where to look. Inside, tucked tightly, was a small photograph. A young man playing piano. A boy, maybe 10, sitting beside him, eyes shining bright. Lucas stared. His hands began to tremble. It was him, at that age, with his old piano. And the boy had Grace's eyes. On the back of the photo, in the scrawled handwriting of a child, were the words, "Mom, I want to learn to play like him. Let's find him this summer." Lucas sank into the chair behind him. It was no longer about the box, not even about the song. It was a thread, delicate, invisible, stretching from a single summer night through the span of a lifetime, tying together two souls that had once passed each other in silence. Lucas set the photo down on the workbench, his hands still trembling slightly. Something inside him had been shaken loose, not out of shock, but because something impossibly fragile, yet deeply real, had finally found its way to the surface. Ryan, the boy whose name he never knew, had remembered him all these years, not because of who he was, but because of a single moment Lucas had forgotten he ever lived. His eyes drifted toward the old piano in the corner of the garage, the one he had treated like a monument to grief, too heavy to approach. But this time, he walked toward it. No hesitation, no fear, just a quiet step forward, and he sat down. The photo was gently placed on the music stand. No frame, no ceremony, just exactly where it needed to be. Lucas cracked his knuckles, drew in a breath, as if every inhale was laced with 3 decades of silence, and then he played, not to perform, not to bring something to a close, but to begin. The old melody rose, complete for the first time. The middle notes, once abandoned, now connected. The ending he had once feared to write flowed from his hands like it had been waiting there all along, just needing someone brave enough to play it through. Across the garage, Grace stepped inside, quietly, unannounced. She leaned against the doorframe, her eyes glistening, not with sorrow, but with something that had been returned. When the final note faded, no one said a word. None were needed. Lucas looked over at her, voice rough from everything unspoken. "Ryan brought it back." Grace nodded, walked forward, and gently placed the now-repaired music box on the piano. A symbol, a beginning. "And maybe," she whispered, "it's time we give that to someone else." From a music box, a photograph, and a forgotten song, two people who had once been broken rediscovered something greater, the power to begin again, with a single, quiet act. Music didn't return with applause. It returned in the quiet afternoons. Lucas began leaving the garage door ajar every time he sat at the piano, not for anyone to listen, but so the afternoon light could bathe the old ivory keys in gold. And there was someone who often stopped by, no reason needed, just a coffee or a simple nod. Grace. She was no longer the woman stepping out of an SUV. Here she walked, wore an old sweater, sat on a folding chair as if she had always belonged here. And sometimes she read aloud Ryan's notes about the box, the song, the man who played the piano and whom Ryan had called the Knight of Sound. Lucas once thought she came only for her son's memory, but gradually he realized she stayed for herself. The small garage began to change, quietly, no grand plans. Just one day, Grace brought in a custom-made black iron music stand. Another day, a friend in town donated an old piano from a church that had closed down. One corner of the garage was cleared, carpeted. Soft yellow lights hung overhead. No one called it a classroom, but the children started coming, shy at first, then laughter, offbeat rhythms, and those bright eyes when the first melody slipped from tiny hands. Lucas didn't call himself a teacher. Grace didn't call herself a companion. But in those faltering beats, something was growing, like a family with no need for a name. That late afternoon when the last child left, leaving the scent of pencils and sheet music hanging in the air, Grace stood beside Lucas in the doorway. "Did you ever think," she asked softly, "that we're building something we never had?" Lucas looked at her. Then he looked down at his hands, now familiar once more with the piano keys. "No," he said, his voice soft like a song. "But now, I don't want to lose it." 1 year after the song was played again for the first time, the town of Pine Grove Ridge witnessed something extraordinary. Music had returned, not from speakers, not from the radio or the church, but from a modest wooden building on the edge of Main Street, what had once been Lucas Griffin's old garage. Now a wooden sign hung in front with hand-carved letters. Pine Grove Music Hall, dedicated to Ryan Mercer. All hearts are welcome. In the softly lit room, where the spring breeze flowed through the large windows, children sat cross-legged around the piano, eagerly talking about Mr. Lucas and Miss Grace. Two adults who never demanded perfection, only sincerity. Lucas would whisper, "Play with your heart, and the rest will follow." And Grace would always smile, standing at the back of the room, keeping the promise she made to her son, to ensure that music always found its way home. At the end of each class, they would open the old music box, Ryan's music box, and let it play the final notes, a gentle farewell to close one chapter and open the next. One late spring afternoon, as Lucas was wiping down the piano, a new boy arrived, hesitant, asking, "Did you ever fear playing music again, like I do now?" Lucas knelt down, smiling. "I once thought I had nothing left to give, but it turns out there was still an unfinished song in my heart, just waiting for the right person to listen." The boy nodded and walked over to the piano. The first note sounded, off-key, trembling, but Grace stood behind, gently resting her hand on Lucas's shoulder. "Can you hear it?" she whispered. He nodded, his eyes distant, looking out the window where the afternoon sun was painting the wooden porch in golden light. "Yeah, I hear it. And this time, I won't leave while the song is still unfinished. No ending needed, because some melodies are born to play on forever." That afternoon, light rain fell, a kind of rain that only comes when the mind has too many unsaid things. Lucas was organizing an old drawer in the corner of the garage when his hand brushed against something that had been there for 3 decades, a small, slightly crumpled envelope, no address. He flipped it over, the fading writing, "To the girl who said the song didn't need an ending." At that moment, the garage door opened. Grace walked in, holding another envelope. "I just found this too," she said, her voice tinged with emotion. "I wrote it right after the night at Summerlight Park, but I didn't know who to send it to." They sat across from each other, two pieces of the past, one of youth, one of regret, resting in their hands. Lucas opened the letter first. The words, written slanting and tender, came from a heart still broken. "Thank you for standing there under the trees. You didn't say much, but you made me believe that the things I carry inside could touch someone. I don't know your name, but if someday you hear this song again, please remember, you are the reason it exists." Grace didn't speak. She opened her own letter, her lips trembling. "You played the song as if the world would stop turning if no one listened. I meant to find you, but life swept me away. Still, that night never left me. If I ever meet you again, I hope I'll have the courage to not just listen, but stay." A silence fell between them. Not because there were no words, but because every emotion they had both kept inside overflowed. Lucas looked at her, as if time had been given back. Grace answered with eyes moist, yet brighter than ever before. They didn't need to say, "It should have been," because two forgotten letters had found their rightful hands at just the right moment. And in that instant, the unfinished song from years ago was finally named. That evening, Rosewood Hall gleamed as if the small town of Pine Grove Ridge was holding its breath, waiting for something that had been lost long ago. There were no velvet curtains, no accompanying orchestra. Just a single piano placed center stage, its keys bathed in the soft yellow light that poured down like the last sunset of fall. Lucas Griffin stood backstage, his hands trembling slightly, not because of the stage, but because the song he was about to play was the part of himself he had never dared to face. The hall was full, the townspeople, the children from the music class, the bakery owner, the elderly doctor, even the mayor had come. No one spoke much. They only waited, because everyone sensed tonight was the first time, and perhaps the only time. Lucas stepped onto the stage. He didn't make a speech, didn't bow. He simply sat down, placed his hands on the keys, a breath. And then the melody began. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't flashy. It opened with deep notes like someone's heart calling out in the night. Then it slowly rose, uneven yet sincere, like the morning light breaking through the mist over a March field. The audience didn't cry immediately, but they sat in silence, because something in that music reached the place where no words could ever go. In the front row, Grace sat still, holding the music box. On the small program sheet in her lap was a line she had written herself, "Where the Light Returns," by Lucas Griffin. When the final note rang out, there was no immediate applause, only silence, thick, deep, and full. A moment that lingered like a silent thank you to the artist who had lost himself and had found his way back. Then the applause came, not overwhelming, but genuine. The children stood first, then the adults. The entire hall rose, but Lucas didn't look at anyone. He only looked at Grace and smiled, because he knew the music was no longer just his. It was for all of them, where the light returns. That afternoon, the sky blushed with a soft pink hue, as if the whole world knew it was time to close an old chapter and open something gentler. On the porch of the small wooden cabin at Whispering Pines Retreat, where the chirping of birds blended with the whispering winds through the pine trees, Lucas Griffin sat beside Grace Harper. without the need for many words. No more haunting questions, no unfinished memories waiting to be named, just the quiet presence between two people who had once been broken. In front of them were two steaming cups of tea, and in the distance fields recently harvested, golden straw gleaming under the slanted sun. And behind them was a journey neither of them had ever imagined they'd walk together again from the beginning. "I never thought," Lucas said softly, "that I could love again." Grace turned to him, not startled, not asking why, just a gentle smile, as if she had known that truth for a long time, just waiting for him to say it aloud. "It's not the kind of love that burns everything down," he continued, his gaze fixed on the distant sky. "It's the kind of love that grows from small things." A song played again, a letter finding its rightful hands, an old box that never fell into oblivion. Grace placed her hand on his, not hurriedly. "That's grown-up love," she whispered. "Quiet, but enduring." Lucas nodded, feeling for the first time that the story of his life was no longer left hanging. All the unfinished notes had finally found their place. On the cabin railing, a lilac petal fell, gently landing in the palm of his hand, as if it were a small, quiet sign, subtle yet certain. Something beautiful had truly begun. In the late afternoon light of Pine Grove Ridge, there were no promises needed, no conclusions to be drawn, just two people, a wooden porch, and the silent agreement between two hearts, ready to write the next chapter through music and love. As the days passed, the music in that small room continued to echo every evening, as if Pine Grove Ridge had never lost anything, but had simply been waiting for it to return at the right moment. Pine Grove Music Hall, once just an old garage, had become the heart of the town's music. It wasn't glamorous, there were no stage lights, but every note that played there carried with it memories, love, and hope. The children who once sat timidly in the corners of the room now confidently ran their fingers across the piano keys. The parents who had forgotten that music could heal now sat in quiet reverence, listening. In that place, music wasn't just taught, it was lived. Lucas Griffin was no longer the lonely man fixing cars in the garage. He was a music teacher and a man brave enough to love again, thanks to a music box, a hidden photograph, and a woman who returned at just the right time. And Grace, she was no longer the mother carrying silent pain. She was the one who rekindled the melody, with memories, with courage, and with a letter never sent. Perhaps the most beautiful part of this story wasn't the love found again, but the unfinished song from so long ago, finally given its conclusion, not rushed, but whole. If you've ever held on to an unfinished song in your heart, a feeling that hasn't found its echo, give it more time, because some melodies need the whole journey to find their way home. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to hear stories that touch the deepest parts of us. Thank you for being here. Each of our lives holds unfinished songs, unspoken emotions, dreams left halfway, people we've met and thought we'd forget, but who never truly leave us. The story of Lucas Griffin and Grace Harper didn't begin with love, but with an old music box, a seemingly insignificant object, yet carrying within it a whole history, a pain, and a faith that had never been forgotten. It reminds us that sometimes, to heal, we don't need much, just someone to listen to what we no longer have the courage to say. Someone who believes that what we've lost still deserves to be picked up again. Like the song Lucas wrote for his lost brother. Like the look Grace once gave a stranger. Like young Ryan carrying hope through his final years. Life doesn't always give us second chances, but if it does, sometimes in the form of a box, a song, or a person we never expected to return, be brave enough to open your heart and embrace it. Because some melodies never die. They simply wait for someone ready to listen to them again, once more.